What started out as a memo addressed to the President of the United States from one of his close advisors may have become a major embarrassment to the United States. The cocaine memorandum was written by President Carter's special assistant on drug abuse, Dr. Peter Bourne. It is, or was, a secret document charging that our present policy with regard to cocaine entering the United States from Latin America was a, quote, complete failure, unquote. Well, that should come as no surprise to the police in most of our big cities. But what is shocking and perhaps embarrassing to the United States government is that the memo goes on to describe a link between cocaine and some of the people who sit in the highest councils of the government of Colombia. As you'll see in a moment, even Rosalind Carter got in the act as an emissary of the president in what may turn out to be this administration's biggest diplomatic blunder in Latin America. It is a fact that from ports and airstrips in Colombia comes 70% of the cocaine that enters this country. It's also a fact that in Colombia, exported cocaine brings in more money than exported coffee. But is it a fact, as the White House memo alleges, that high members of the Colombian government are involved? We'll get to that memo in a moment. First, let's look at cocaine from a dollar point of view. This is Cartagena, a Colombian mecca for American tourists. It is also one of the main transshipment points for cocaine to the United States. It's a business worth about $500 million a year. Some of the profits are poured into luxury hotels. American agents say these 3 hotels are owned by people in the drug trade. The cocaine dollars and the tourist dollars often go to the same people. American drug enforcement agents say they know who the traffickers are, but cannot touch them. The absence of a conspiracy law in Colombia means that Colombian police can't touch them either, unless they catch one red-handed with cocaine. So our DEA undercover man in Cartagena is frustrated. All he can do is gather information.
Today I talked to a contact. The contact said that there's a captain here staying at the Hotel Tocawas that belongs to one of the traffickers, and he's a captain on a vessel. He's waiting for 40 kilos of cocaine. We know that there is the cocaine is here. The local narcotic enforcement officers know there's cocaine, but without the specific information put out by an informant on which vessel, which seaman is taking the cocaine on board, we just have our hands tied here. Information that we get here is that is shipping cocaine north. It's just not customary for customs to conduct a search on a vessel leaving the port. They're not interested in anything leaving Colombia. Say, for instance, on the Gloria, that's a training vessel out of Colombia. We had information before the vessel left that there was going to be a huge shipment of cocaine going on that vessel. I followed that vessel to New York. It was an open house for the tall ships. We also had reports that they unloaded huge amounts of cocaine. Even though we had heavy surveillance on that vessel, they still unloaded the cocaine on us. There were thousands and thousands and thousands of people there. We just couldn't search everybody leaving the vessel.
And so, the cocaine memorandum. It urges the president to withhold 3 helicopters to be used for narcotics control that had been promised to Colombia until that country cracks down on traffickers. Dr. Bourne's memo goes on to say, and we quote, "Some people in the State Department are willing to just give them the helicopters to avoid conflict. I oppose this and feel they're one of the only points of leverage we have. There's also some question at present as to whether the helicopters might not be used to transport cocaine rather than interdicting it." Well, the whole affair was of such urgency that when First Lady Rosalind Carter left on her tour of Latin America last summer, she had, among others, one special mission. When she arrived in Colombia, she was to tell President Alfonso López Michelsen that there was information alleging that a number of high-level Colombian officials were one way or another involved in the traffic of cocaine. Mrs. Carter herself did not carry the names, but she told President López that Dr. Bourne, the president's special assistant and author of that memo, would come to Bogota with a list of names and supporting evidence. So Peter Bourne went to the presidential palace with that list that Rosalind Carter had promised President López. It was a secret and explosive document, for not only did it name a number of low-level government officials, but 2 members of President Lopez's cabinet, the Minister of Defense and the Minister of Labor. And there was a third name, even more explosive, the man most likely to be the next president of Colombia. His name is Dr. Julio Cesar Turbay. Just 6 weeks ago, he was addressing this massive election rally in Bogota. It was, in effect, a primary in advance of the presidential election to be held this June. Winning this would make him a virtual shoo-in for the presidency. Dr. Turbay won the primary in a landslide. But in the memo sent to President Carter, Dr. Bourne stated that Turbay is known to be involved in cocaine traffic. And then later, in the list Dr. Bourne gave to President López Michelson, Dr. Bourne stated that the cocaine network had a relationship with Dr. Turbay's nephew, Anibal Turbay. And the network had made a multi-million peso investment in Anibal Turbay, and as a result, is expected to be able to choose the heads of Colombian law enforcement agencies should Julio Cesar Turbay become president. President López Michelson is not impressed.
What they said about Senor Turbay was not about him, was about a nephew of him. Nephew that was living in the United States at the time. So please explain me how, if he was in the United States, he was not caught by the police if the charge was true. Besides, most of this charge had no basis whatever. They had acted superficially, taking into account gossip from all sorts of people that had no information, and the information they received, they never checked, as I can prove every time.
And yet, the influence of the traffickers seems to be extremely insidious. It seems to, one way or another, reach into government, whether individuals know it or not. Is that correct?
As I say, they have such a financial power that they bribe petty officers at all levels. When I mean levels, it's national or municipal or departmental.
Police?
Police and civil service.
We've only got 5 agents working the entire country of Colombia. We've got just a handful of Colombian agents that are very capable of doing it, but they don't have the means, they don't have the equipment to be able to enforce the laws adequately. And the bad guys are winning the war.
Why has the battle against cocaine been so difficult? Why have you not been able to knock it out?
Well, let's put things the other way. Why is it so difficult for the United States to stop cocaine entering into the United States?
Well, it's a small...
If you have such resources, such a big army, such a powerful navy, such an army force, and you cannot stop cocaine entering the United States, how do you expect a small country with a coast on the 2 oceans, fighting with far less resources than the United States, to avoid cocaine entering into Colombia? Let's be frank about it. We are not corrupting the Americans. The Americans are corrupting us. We are not selling our cocaine in Times Square.
But much of the profits of those sales, no matter who does the selling, returns to Colombia. And it's no secret to Colombian newspapermen.
All these financial institutions in Colombia know that this money is there. The government knows it's there because it wouldn't have opened that famous sinister window in the National Bank to channelize all this money that the government knows comes from drug traffic.
What's this sinister window?
It's called La Ventanilla Siniestra, a sinister window in the National Bank where dollars are traded without asking where they come from.
Any kind of dollars.
And the government knows that 90% of the dollars that are traded there come from drug traffic.
Enrique Santos is the editor of Alternativa, a radical Colombian weekly. His father is the managing editor of El Tiempo, one of the most highly regarded newspapers in Latin America. Though father and son are poles apart politically, they both agree that the power of cocaine dollars can have a mighty hold over politicians in Colombia. So what about those allegations made by Peter Bourne against Oscar Montoya, the Minister of Labor, and General Abraham Verón, Minister of Defense, and against Dr. Turbay? What do the local newspapermen think of these American allegations?
And in relation to Turbay's immediate family, a lot of things are alleged, but very difficult to prove. I'm almost convinced that him, personally, he's not involved because he's a very shrewd politician all his life, so he's not so dumb. Montoya was a surprise to us in Alternativa. We were the first publication to publish that name here. Came from a very good source. But in a way it was surprising because this person hasn't been identified with this kind of deals, no? He's a very reactionary person, but apparently he was an honest guy.
And the elder Santos dismisses the charges against General Verón, the Minister of War, as he calls him.
Really, I honestly can say that we have not found yet one single connection between Minister of War and the cocaine or marijuana traffic.
There are some comic opera elements in this story. There may well be high-level officials who are corrupt, but leave it to the Americans to sniff out the wrong ones. That's the feeling in the presidential palace, where it's felt that the whole affair represents old-fashioned American monkeying in Latin America. Inept, small-stick diplomacy, and lacking a certain elegance. Using President Carter's wife as a bearer of bad tidings was thought to be particularly bad form. Well, what does the author of the cocaine memorandum say to all this? President Carter's special assistant on drug abuse, Peter Bourne, may wish he'd never sent it. He certainly wishes we'd never gotten our hands on it.
What was the source of your information? Where did you get the names from that you put on the list to President López?
Well, from a variety of sources, from some reliable and some not very reliable.
Do you stand by that list and say Montoya, Verón, and Turbay are most likely involved in cocaine traffic?
I don't know what list you have seen. As far as I'm concerned, from our standpoint, the conversations that we had with López Michelson are still, from our standpoint, confidential.
Of course, the most serious allegation made, this most serious name named, was Dr. Turbay. The suggestion was that because Turbay's nephew was involved, those people involved in the trafficking of cocaine would have some kind of political hold over the future President Turbay, correct?
Well, they may think that they would. I presume only President Turbay could answer that question. But we did not suggest this to President López Michelson.
President López was openly angered by the charges. The charge against the Minister of Defense, he said, was an American clerical error. Someone confused a low-level person in the Ministry of Defense with the Minister of Defense.
And the charge against the Minister of Labor was also something similar. There was a private secretary or someone connected with the ministry that was involved in the traffic of coffee, black market coffee. And he had used the phone of the ministry when he was away.
Black market coffee?
Yes. And of course he was dismissed. But it's a completely different thing. To export coffee without license out of the country than to be involved in the traffic of drugs. And besides, it was not the minister.
What you're suggesting is extremely sloppy work by the White House, by the Drug Enforcement Administration, by, heaven knows, the FBI, the CIA. Correct?
I'm very sorry, but I have to admit it.
Are you happy in your own mind? Is President Carter satisfied now in his mind? So the seeds of suspicion having been planted by you. Are you happy with President López's explanation that these men are clean?
Well, we have no information other than what we have passed on to him. If he is satisfied, then that is good enough for us.
So what is the effect of Peter Bourne's cocaine memorandum? Dr. Bourne told us that when he wrote it, he was trying to get President Carter's attention, and he certainly seems to have achieved that. But there's another effect. It succeeded in angering the Colombians, who, corruption or no corruption, run one of the few democracies in Latin America. Our whole drug enforcement policy in Latin America is tainted with the attitude that somehow this country is the innocent victim of a bunch of wily and crooked South Americans who make $500 million a year out of cocaine. But it should be pointed out that we managed to stop less than 10% of the cocaine that enters the United States, and that once in this country, a bunch of wily and crooked North Americans turn it into a $1 billion a year industry.